My parents left my grandpa at my doorstep, like trash at 5:30 in the freezing morning, along with a note. You take care of him. We can't manage it anymore. They push him out just to make room for their golden child. But a year later, they returned, pleading to take him back. Hey, read it. It was one of those mornings where the world was still asleep. The streetlights buzzed softly. The sky was heavy with frost, and the only sound was the wind scraping across the frozen road. Then I heard it, a faint knock, 3 soft taps, just enough to make me sit up in bed. Initially, I thought it might be a delivery or a neighbor, but when I opened the door, my heart sank. There he was, my grandfather, standing on the porch in his old coat, eyes wide and lost. Frost clung to his hair, and his breath came out in slow clouds. He held a crumpled piece of paper in his shaking hands. Grandpa, I whispered, what are you doing here? He just looked at me, exhausted, shivering, and handed me the note. The paper was wet from the snow, but the words were still readable. You take care of him. We can't handle it anymore. I didn't need to check who wrote it. I recognized that handwriting too well. It was my mother's. I immediately brought Grandpa inside, helped him out of his coat, and made him some tea. His hands were cold, his skin pale and dry like parchment. He kept murmuring. They said I was a burden, that I made too much noise. I wanted to say something comforting, but I couldn't find the words. How could I explain that kind of cruelty? How could I justify my parents abandoning an old man at my door just because taking care of him became inconvenient? That morning, I called my mom. She didn't even sound remorseful. Oh, thank God you found him, she said, relieved. He kept wandering at night. We were worried he'd hurt himself. So you dropped him off at my doorstep in the freezing cold? I snapped. Don't be dramatic, she replied. You live closer to the hospital. It just makes sense. I wanted to scream, but Grandpa was quietly sipping tea in the living room. Try not to cry. So I held back. Instead, I said, I'll take care of him. You don't need to worry about him anymore. Mom paused. Good, she said flatly. We just don't have the space. You know how things are with Ryan and the baby. Ryan, my little brother, their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. They had kicked Grandpa out to make room for him. The next few months were tough but unexpectedly beautiful. I rearranged my guest room for Grandpa, took him to doctor's appointments, and helped him rediscover his love for painting. He'd sit by the window with a brush in his hand and say, You know, your grandmother always told me I'd see sunlight again when I least expect it. Maybe she was right. Slowly, the house began to feel alive. He'd share stories about his childhood, the war, and how my dad used to sneak cookies at midnight. He'd hum old songs while I worked late at my desk. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shares your heart when no one else will. One night, while I was washing dishes, Grandpa said quietly, They'll regret what they did. I smiled. I'm not sure they ever think about us long enough to regret anything. He looked at me with those soft, knowing eyes. You'd be surprised. People always come back when they think they've lost control. He was right, because 1 year later, that knock came again. This time, it wasn't Grandpa at my door. It was my mother, pale and frantic, her eyes red from crying. Please, she said, her voice trembling. We need to talk. Behind her stood my father, clutching his coat like he didn't belong, and my brother Ryan, avoiding my gaze. What's going on? I asked. Mom's eyes darted past me, searching the hallway. Is he here? Is Dad home? He's painting. I replied. Why? She hesitated, then blurted out. We need him to come back. Please come back, I repeated, stunned. You left him on my porch like trash, remember? It was a mistake, she said quickly. We didn't know he'd have that much money saved. I froze. Money. Dad stepped forward, muttering under his breath. Your grandfather's lawyer contacted us. Apparently, he sold the family farmland last year and split the money into separate accounts. Mom continued. He told us we'd inherit equally, but we just found out he left everything to you. So now you care. I said quietly. Ryan rolled his eyes. Don't make this a drama, man. Just convince him to move back. Once he does, we can figure this out. Figure it out? I whispered. You mean take what's his again? Mom's face fell. We're his family. We deserve a share. I stepped closer. No, Mom. You're not his family. Not anymore. You dumped him the cold to make room for your golden child. You treated him like baggage. And now you want him back because of money. Dad snapped. Watch your mouth. No, I said firmly. You watch yours. Because if you ever show up here again asking for his money, I'll remind the lawyer exactly how you abandoned him in writing. Mom started to cry. Ryan muttered something and stormed off. Dad just stood there silent. And for the first time in my life, I noticed it, the look of guilt on his face. The look of a man who finally realized he couldn't manipulate everyone forever. I closed the door gently. Behind me, Grandpa stood at the end of the hallway, brush in hand, smiling faintly. They came back, didn't they? He asked. Yeah, I said softly. They did. He nodded once. And you didn't let them in. Good. That night, we sat together by the fire. He painted the night sky, and I realized that in choosing to care for him, I hadn't just saved him. He'd saved me. But I had no idea that Grandpa's final painting would hold a secret, one that would make my parents come crawling back again. This time, not for money, but for forgiveness. After that night, life settled into a calm, almost peaceful routine. Grandpa painted every morning by the window, his brush gliding gently across the canvas as sunlight poured through the curtains. He never mentioned my parents again. He didn't have to. The silence between us held everything that words couldn't convey. Months passed. I'd wake to the smell of coffee, the sound of brushstrokes, and the low hum of old jazz on his radio. The house that had once felt cold had transformed into a home, stitched together by shared solitude and second chances. Then one afternoon, he called me over. Sit with me, Daniel. His voice was softer than usual, fragile but warm. I sat beside him, and on the easel stood his latest painting, the one he'd been working on for weeks. At first glance, it was a snow-covered porch, the same porch where I'd found him that morning a year ago. But this time, there was light pouring through the door, golden, gentle, forgiving. It's you, he said quietly. You opened the door. You didn't ask why. You just did. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. You don't need to thank me, Grandpa. He smiled a little. I'm not thanking you, son. I'm leaving you something. He took a small envelope from his coat pocket and set it on the table. Don't open it until I'm gone. 2 weeks later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. Just as he wished, brush in hand, a half-finished painting beside him. I buried him on a Sunday morning beneath the oak tree he used to paint from memory. Only a few neighbors showed up, not my parents, not Ryan. As I stood there with the snow falling around me, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter and a legal document, a will update he never mentioned to anyone. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I've gone home. I left you something more than money. The farm I sold was only half my fortune. The rest is in a trust for you to decide what to do with, but only after you paint one last thing for me. Below the letter was a small photo of my parents' house, the place they had discarded him from. At first, I didn't understand, but as the days passed, I realized what he wanted me to do. He didn't want revenge. He wanted closure and color. So I painted. For days, I stood in the garage with his old brushes, the same ones that still smelled of turpentine and cedar. And on that canvas, I recreated the scene exactly as it was at night. The porch, the cold light, his figure at the door. But this time, I added something he never saw, me, standing in the doorway, hand extended, light pouring out like forgiveness. When the painting was finished, I hung it in the local art gallery for the winter exhibit. I titled it, The Man They Left in the Cold. It became the centerpiece. People stood in silence for minutes, some crying, some smiling, and that's when I understood. Grandpa knew this would speak louder than any argument ever could. 2 months later, my parents showed up again. This time, they weren't angry. They were trembling. Mom held a newspaper featuring the painting on the front page. The headline read, Local artist honors grandfather abandoned in the cold. How could you? She whispered. You made us look like monsters. You did that yourselves, I replied quietly. I just painted the truth. Dad looked at the floor, unable to say anything. I handed them a sealed envelope, the one from Grandpa's trust. He left you something, too. They opened it and found a single note. For those who forgot what love feels like, remember, it's never too late to learn how to be human again. Mom began to cry then, not out of anger but guilt. Dad stood there, shoulders slumped as the weight of his choices finally hit him. We miss him, Mom said softly. Then honor him, I replied, by being the kind of people he believed you could be. They left without saying another word. And for the first time, I didn't feel rage or satisfaction. I just felt peace, because Grandpa was right. Forgiveness isn't about erasing what they did. It's about freeing yourself from it. A year later, the gallery announced that my painting would be donated to the Veterans Foundation in Grandpa's name. The press release called it A Story of Forgiveness Painted in Winter. As I stood before that canvas one last time, I swore I could feel him beside me, that gentle hand on my shoulder, that voice saying, "You did good. Son, you opened the door." They left him in the cold for comfort and space. But a year later, they found themselves frozen in their own guilt, because you can abandon a person, but you can't bury the truth.